In today's video, we have the latest trade talk from around the league. Could we see a significant deal between the Habs and the Canucks involving Brock Boeser? Could Mattias Ekholm possibly be moved to the Ottawa Senators? Could Flyers center Kevin Hayes end up in his hometown in Boston? Plus, we're going to take a look at the Detroit Red Wings and Tyler Bertuzzi and see if there's a fit for an extension there. Plus, we have several updates on the injuries and roster moves, and we actually have 2 waiver claims from players on waivers yesterday. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here today, so let's dive right in and get started. Let's start with the news from the NHL waiver wire. We actually had 2 waiver claims today. Both players on waivers yesterday were picked up by other NHL clubs. I am a little bit surprised. I really thought both these players had an excellent shot at clearing, but not so. Buffalo Sabres defenseman Casey Fitzgerald on waivers was picked up by the Florida Panthers. Of course, the Panthers have had their fair share of blue line injuries and blue line deficiencies this year. So Fitzgerald will go from Buffalo to Florida. Hopefully he'll get more of an opportunity there. I believe he had appeared in around 20 games or so for Buffalo this season so far. But as the Sabres blue line gets healthier, less chance for him to get playing time there. And the Vegas Golden Knights had centerman Jake Leschyshyn, who of course is only in his second year in the NHL. Had a tough year though in Vegas. Played in, I believe it was 22 games. Had no points. It was time for another player in Vegas to get an opportunity. They placed him on waivers, and he was actually picked up by the New York Rangers. Now I'm not entirely convinced he'll remain in the Rangers organization too long, or if he does, he could end up in the minors down the road. Right now, the Rangers are dealing with I don't believe it's too serious, but an injury to Chris Kreider, so there was a roster spot open. They elected to pick up Jake Leschyshyn rather than fill that spot with another player in their system, and he'll be there for temporarily at the very least. Once Kreider returns, they'll have to make a decision. He could end up back on waivers again, and of course, if he clears, he could stay with them, go to the minors, or end up going elsewhere. It's difficult to say, but 2 waiver claims to start today, which is not something that I certainly expected. Some other NHL news are from injuries and roster moves. The New York Islanders have returned defenseman Robin Salo and young centerman Atu Ratu back to the American Hockey League. Both players have been up in the club for some time. I know Ratu's had a pretty good showing. I'm a little bit surprised he's got sent back, but it could be obviously a case of needing the roster spot, being waivers exempt, so it certainly makes things a little bit easier when a veteran's coming off IR or something to that nature, but he certainly looked good, certainly appears to be a big part of their future, and I hope he gets more opportunity this year. The Boston Bruins have also sent back veteran Chris Wagner back down to the American Hockey League after being up with the NHL club for a stint of time. Tonight's game featuring the Toronto Maple Leafs will not be showing Austin Matthews in the lineup. He's going to sit out tonight's game. Sheldon Keefe, the head coach of the Leafs, calls this basically maintenance to take care of hopefully resting a nagging injury. We really don't know the full extent of it. I know some people on social media are speculating it's a version of load management. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I know some fans are convinced that he might be dealing with a back issue. I know back earlier this season, I can't remember the exact date, but I know it was fairly early on. They had a game against the Dallas Stars, and he took a bit of a cross-check from the backside from Jamie Benn. Of course, Ben's a big, strong guy. It certainly looked like it hurt. I know a lot of fans noticed a difference in just how he was in movement, and it seemed to be uncomfortable. So we don't know for sure, but that's the speculation, at least on what the injury is. And if it's something he's been playing through, it's probably best that they take some time now and let him heal up and get healthy before the season gets too deeper and get too close to the playoffs. Because certainly the Maple Leafs, from a standings perspective, are in excellent shape. They're not in any danger of missing the playoffs. They'd have to have an absolute disaster of a second half, so that's not going to happen, at least not to that extent. Even if their second half isn't as good as the first, they should have no issues qualifying. And at this rate, it's pretty much, I wouldn't say it's a given, but it's a very high probability that they not only know they're going to make the playoffs, but they know who their opponent's going to be. Because in the Atlantic Division, you've got the Bruins with a massive lead, and then you've got Toronto, Tampa 2-3, and they have a pretty good gap between the teams that are trailing them, trying to catch up between teams like Buffalo and Florida, Ottawa, Detroit. They're far enough behind them that the odds of somebody catching the Leafs and the Lightning are not great. Those teams are at best, and I stress at best, going to battle for the wild card spots if they can get in there. And it's possible the Metro might see 5 teams get in because the Metro lower teams are a bit ahead of them. So, worst case scenario, I think when it comes to, some of the Metro teams is they might end up, losing a spot or two to the wild card if those Atlantic teams can catch up. But either way, the Leafs are certainly safe for sure. So if he needs time, they're better to give it to him now and get it taken care of. At least that's what I feel. Habs forward Brendan Gallagher. We had talked in the last day or two that the Habs said he was going to be out for 2 weeks. Well, now they've upgraded that and saying he's going to be out for about 6 weeks with a lower body injury. So Brendan Gallagher has had a difficult time the past couple of years staying healthy. He's had a very difficult time being productive when he's been on the ice. I think it's fair to say the last couple of years for Brendan Gallagher have been pretty much a disaster. And it's really hard to say what that means for the remaining part of his career. He still has a lot of term on his contract with Montreal, and he's nowhere near the player he used to be, can't stay healthy, and just hasn't produced like he used to as well. I'm sure those injuries have taken its toll on his body. Father time is undefeated, as they say, and the injuries pile up. It makes a huge difference in how you feel and what you can do out there. So be curious to see how that impacts him moving forward. But he's going to miss, a significant, piece of the remainder of the year, that's for sure. The Hurricanes today also activated goaltender Freddie Anderson, who's been out for a substantial period of time. So I'll be curious to see how they handle the goaltending situation. Obviously, they have Kochetkov and they have Ranta. Kochetkov has been running with the show here. He's been a Rookie of the Month recently. I don't see him getting sent down to the American Hockey League. At least I'd be shocked if he did. So I don't know what that's going to mean. I speculated before. I wondered if we'll see a Hurricanes goalie trade. And now that Anderson's healthy, we'll have to see how they handle things here and where they go from here. The Penguins have also placed goalie Tristan Jarry and forward Ryan Poehling also on injured reserve. So they're expected to be out of action for at least a bit of period of time there. Now, the NHL has announced and confirmed who their coaches are going to be for the upcoming NHL All-Star Game. Of course, it's done by division. Each division has a squad and with a coach. And then, of course, they play 3-on-3 tournament, essentially. The Atlantic Division coach, of course, will be Boston Bruins head coach Jim Montgomery. And, of course, in the Metro Division, we have Carolina head coach Rod Brindamore. So, basically, it's whatever coach is leading the division as the division leader in points for the team at the cutoff, which was just passed here. And during the seasons, who gets picked. The Central Division is going to be coached by Peter DeBoer in the Dallas Stars, who's now in first place. And the Pacific Division will be coached by Bruce Cassidy of the Vegas Golden Knights, who's currently in that first spot. So kind of interesting in a way. You get Brindamore is kind of not connected, but the other three certainly are for sure. You've got Jim Montgomery, who's going to be coaching against the guy he replaced in Bruce Cassidy. And Bruce Cassidy, of course, replaced Peter DeBoer. So, the coaching carousel, as they call it around the NHL, going on a wicked cycle last year as a lot of coaches were fired from one spot, hired in somewhere else, ultimately replacing another veteran coach. And here we are with 3 of the coaches in new spots this year, all leading their teams to really good success, and going to be coaching in the All-Star Game. Now, a quick update, too, when it comes to the Hockey Hall of Fame selection committee. Apparently, Bobby Clarke was part of that committee and is no longer going to be. He has stepped away from that role, and the selection committee has now appointed Joe Sakic, of course, the president of the Colorado Avalanche, former general manager, to be on that committee to replace Bobby Clarke. So Joe Sakic will now have a hand in helping select future members of the Hockey Hall of Fame. He's, of course, a Hall of Fame member himself, had a great career, and is certainly in a great spot and position to have that honor given to him along with the other members of that committee. Now, onto the trade rumors section of the video. I do want to start with the potential to see a pretty significant Montreal Canadiens, Vancouver Canucks swap here that could involve forward Brock Boeser. We know the Vancouver Canucks are, I guess you could call them basically a hot mess in my opinion. There's a variety of players that could be moved. Doesn't mean they're all going to be, of course. We know Captain Bo Horvat's on an expiring deal. We know that the odds of him getting moved are high. We know that JT Miller signed a long-term deal, so the odds of him getting moved are probably low given how his season is gone, but he doesn't have trade protection yet, and you have to at least think that the Vancouver Canucks are thinking about it. You could throw other players in there as well. Garland, Pearson, Myers, OEL. To all some degree, the Canucks are all looking at everything, and Brock Boeser is no exception to that rule. Brock Boeser's agent was given permission to speak to other teams as well, and I think the team and the player have kind of acknowledged that it's probably time for a fresh start. We've talked about the possibility of Boeser heading to Minnesota, back to his home state. I know the latest reports I've seen today from NHL insiders are saying that the Wild, certainly as much as they have interest, that Bill Guerin is not confident that he can make the deal work with their salary cap structure. I don't know that the Canucks would want Matt Dumba in return. I know that's one way to maybe make it work, but even if they can make it work this year, Boeser comes with a little bit of term, and longer term past this year, the Wild are in a pretty tough spot. So it's going to be awkward and difficult for them to make that kind of deal work without shedding more money elsewhere. So there is talks that the Montreal Canadiens could certainly be involved. Of course, Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton may be willing to take a shot here on a former 25, 30 goal scorer and get him another chance in Montreal. I don't know what kind of deal they'd be looking at. Could they look for more of a hockey trade and get a player in that's somebody who can help them now? Or are they looking at more at a future-based package? It's not exactly clear. I know there's been some rumblings in the past about what a Boeser trade could look like. I know there's been some talk about a guy like Josh Anderson. I don't know that that's really a solution for Vancouver, but I do know that, that obviously there's lots of pieces of Montreal that they're interested in moving. Personally, if I'm Vancouver, if I'm trading with Montreal in a Brock Boeser deal, I'm looking at some of their younger players and picks and prospects that I would want to bring back in return. To me, they have a lot of interesting players that way. On top of the guys that are in the NHL right now, because they're not going to move Slafkovsky, Suzuki, Caulfield, any of those guys. But take a look at even the guys that are just most recently drafted, like Lane Hudson, for example, Owen Beck, Masar. They have lots of interesting young players that would be interesting to Vancouver. So to me, I'm looking at maybe a pick and prospect or something to that effect for a return. But we'll see. We'll see if that interest from Montreal on Boeser is legit, or how serious, I guess, of an interest it is. But Brock Boeser in Montreal certainly would be interesting to say the least. Now, there's also reports from the fourthperiod.com indicating that Predators defenseman Mattias Ekholm is also on the radar of the Ottawa Senators. Now, of course, we've talked about Ekholm a few times, and right now, based on the Predators doing a little bit better lately, I don't know how quickly David Poile pulls the trigger on this kind of deal. I'm not entirely convinced we're going to see that. I know at the same time, the Predators, if they go on enough of a winning streak to get back in the playoff picture, will David Poile hold off from selling off some assets? I don't think he should, because I'm not sure that this team is really built for long-term playoff success. I think they need to find a way to retool. I don't think they need a full rebuild, but I do think they need some changes, and they need to incorporate more youth and more skill into this lineup and find a way to move on from some other pieces. But Ekholm, I'm not sure that I would move him 100%, but to me, for Ottawa, would he be an upgrade over a lot of the D-men they have? Yes, he would. But at the same time, I don't know that his contract is the most suitable for their new cap structure based on all the new deals they've signed for some of their young, talented players. And they have a pretty good left side. It's mostly the right side that needs more work. They already have Chabot and Sanderson on the left, which Ekholm's a lefty. So, unless they want to put Ekholm on his weak side and play the right side, I don't know that that's really what they need. Ideally, I think they need another guy like Artem Zub, for example. They also have Tyler Clevin coming up at the University of North Dakota, who's likely going to sign at the end of the season. And, he's a good size, physical left D. To me, I think he makes sense to be the third pair left shot D on that team in the not too distant future. They got Jacob Bernard-Docker, Lassie Thompson in the minors. As much as their D core isn't fantastic, I don't know that it's worth them trying to push assets right now out the door to gain an experienced defenseman and try to salvage this year. They might be able to do it if they can get on a big enough winning streak, sure. It's not completely out of the question, but it's not going to be easy. And I just think they need to be careful and cautious about what kind of deal they might make in order to, make this year look a little bit better. We'll see. I'm not sure Ekholm is the exact solution there, but he would be an upgrade over a lot of the, some of the guys they have, like, when you're looking at Hamonic and Holden and those guys for sure. Could we see Kevin Hayes end up in his hometown in Boston? There is reports, of course, that the Flyers are willing to entertain and consider just about anything for a trade. And I know the fourthperiod.com has talked again about Hayes and the possibility of him being moved. Now, he's got 3 years left in his contract with a decent amount of money, over $7 million. So it's not easy to do. But the Fourth Period and Anthony DeMarco and Dave Pagnotta are both talking about the fact that they've talked to several NHL executives, And the word that they've kind of found is that if the Flyers are willing to retain some money in the neighborhood of $2 million or a little better, that it would have a significant increase in the interest in Kevin Hayes and getting a trade done. I know there was some talk about a buyout at the end of the year. If you take a look at that, though, it's going to be expensive. Like, he would have 6 years on the cap altogether because it's 2/3 of the remaining money over twice the period of time. So it's 3 years left. That 3 becomes 6. That's a lot of years to have that on your cap. If they could trade him and have just 3 years with a retained portion, that would be better. And if in the next 3 years, 2 out of those 3 years, the cap, it's still going to be over $4 million. So it's not a huge savings. Yes, it creates a roster spot. It gets them off your books, but not completely, of course. To me, if they can find a trade with a $2 million or a little bit better retained, that would be significantly better. Now, the some speculation I've seen on Twitter is that maybe Kevin Hayes is traded to the Bruins and that the Bruins send some of the unfavorable contracts back to Philly that are only for this year, like Craig Smith is a prime example. So you knock a couple $1 million off for Philly retaining. You take the Craig Smith contract off the books for this year. And, of course, the Bruins do have a lot of players on expiring contracts as well. They don't know the long-term futures of Bergeron and Krejci and several other members of their forward group. So they could still have Hayes be one of their top 3 centers for the couple of years that are remaining on his deal and still work around him. To me, if he can slot down to that third line especially, I think that's where he's best suited. I think his point totals are up as high as they are this year because he was getting top line minutes and getting first power play unit and all that. He's not going to get that on a lot of other teams. So he can still be a very useful and impactful player given the right role. So to me, it makes a lot of sense if we could see Hayes return to Boston. I think it would be something he would be loved to do. Of course, he's from the area. His brother Jimmy, who we lost, Jimmy suddenly passed away not that long ago before the season started. And we know he was having a difficult time being really close to him as his brother. Jimmy played in Boston as well. So I think there would be obviously a lot of family ties, a lot of emotions. And I think it's something that would make a lot of sense from a hockey and business perspective too. So could we see Kevin Hayes head to the Boston Bruins? Not a given, but it does make a lot of sense. That much we can say for sure. And Detroit and Tyler Bertuzzi is not really close to a contract extension yet. But word is from fourthperiod.com again that if he's not signed by the deadline, that he is expected to have a good chance of getting dealt here. Bertuzzi, I think, and Detroit both have a mutual interest to stay with the team and get a deal done. I'm not saying that they absolutely want to get rid of him or anything of that nature. And it does appear there is interest from Bertuzzi to stay. But at the same time, it all boils down to contract negotiations. Of course, his teammate and longtime captain Dylan Larkin also in the same boat on an expiring deal. And it's no secret that Larkin and the team are not the closest from what we've heard on negotiations on a new contract. And there's some that are starting to worry about whether or not Larkin could be moved as well. I would think that they would have a strong mutual interest to get a deal done, but it's not done. And it sounds like there's not much progress being made with some of the other contracts we've seen on the market. Larkin's value is certainly increased, and it sounds like Yzerman is, pretty standing firm on what he wants to pay and what he wants to have him on a contract to stay. So we'll have to see where things go in Detroit, but take a long, hard look at Bertuzzi and Larkin at the deadline if contract negotiations are not met. Like I said, I don't think the plan is to trade them, but if negotiations go poorly, Yzerman might feel like he has no choice. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.